Nobody stopped the bus. Not the woman in the third row who had watched the whole thing from behind her phone screen. Not the man in the gray coat who had given up his seat for her 20 minutes earlier and was now looking out the window like the snow was the most interesting thing he had ever seen. Not even the driver of the bus behind them, who saw her standing on the curb in 19-degree weather with one hand on her stomach and the other reaching for a door that had already closed. Route 63 southbound. Chicago. February 14th. The pregnant woman's name was Imani. She was 8 months along. She was standing in the snow because the driver of the bus she had been on, a man named Gerald Pitts, had told her that she was making other passengers uncomfortable, and had opened the door and waited until she stepped off. On Valentine's Day. In a snowstorm. 8 months pregnant. And every single person on that bus let it happen. I want you to remember that. I want you to hold on to that image, a woman standing on a curb in 19 degrees with her hand on her stomach, watching a bus pull away, because we are going to come back to it. And when we do, you are going to understand that what happened next was not an accident. It was not luck. It was not a coincidence. It was something that had been building for 38 years, since a 7-year-old boy stood alone at a bus stop in East St. Louis in the snow and learned, in the most permanent way a lesson can be learned, exactly what it feels like when the door closes and the car keeps moving. Stay with me. Because this story is not about one cold night. It is about what one cold night plants inside a person, and what grows from it 38 years later. Cedric Darnell Holloway grew up in East St. Louis, Illinois. His father, Roland, left when Cedric was 4. Not dramatically. He simply stopped coming home one winter. By spring, the closet where his coats had been was just a closet. Empty hangers. The particular silence of a space that used to hold someone and then held nothing. Cedric did not remember Roland leaving. He remembered the closet. This is a small but important detail. He did not remember his father. He remembered the empty closet. That is how abandonment works on small children. It does not land as a dramatic event. It lands as an absence. A space that used to have something in it and now does not. No explanation. No goodbye. Just empty hangers. And a child who is going to spend the rest of his life making sure that nobody else ever reaches for something that should be there and finds nothing. His mother, Lorraine Holloway, did not explain where Roland went. She did not need to. The explanation was in the empty closet and the extra shifts and the way she started locking the front door with both locks instead of one. Lorraine worked the night shift at the Tyson Foods processing plant. 10 at night to 6 in the morning. 5 days a week. Sometimes 6. She had been doing it long enough that her body had stopped protesting and had simply rearranged itself around the schedule, the way a tree grows around a fence post. Not gracefully. Just eventually. Her hands told the story her mouth never did. Thick in the knuckles. Rough across the palms. The cold from the plant floor had settled into her joints permanently by the time she was 40. She opened and closed her fingers in the morning like someone testing a machine that used to work smoothly and now required negotiation. She never complained about the hands. She never complained about much of anything. Not because she did not feel it, but because complaining required an audience and energy, and she had neither to spare. I want to stay here for a moment and give Lorraine Holloway the attention she deserves. Because there are millions of Lorraines in this world and the world keeps moving past them like a bus past a bus stop. Women who work the shift that starts when most people are already asleep. Women whose hands hurt permanently by the age of 40 from doing work that keeps other people's lives running. Women who never complain, not because they have nothing to complain about, but because they have already decided that the energy required to complain is energy they cannot afford to spend. The world calls this strength. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is also what happens when a person has been given no other option. We should be honest about both. Lorraine taught her children without words. She taught with behavior. When Mrs. Dolores Parker, 3 houses down, had pneumonia and could not get out of bed, Lorraine made soup at 9:30 at night before her shift and carried it over. She only had 2 pots. She could not really spare the one she was lending. She lent it anyway. When a new family moved onto the block, a young mother with 3 kids and boxes still unpacked in the yard, Lorraine was the first one to knock. Not with food, because she did not have extra food. With information. Which bus to take to the school on Dexter? Which number to call for emergency housing? Which church gave out groceries on Thursdays without asking questions first? You gave what you had. If you had food, you gave food. If you had information, you gave information. If you had time, you gave time. Something always. Cedric was 7 years old the evening everything he would later become was set in motion. Lorraine was working a double. His after-school tutor dropped him at the bus stop on Martin Luther King Drive at 4:15. The bus was supposed to come at 4:30. It did not come at 4:30. It did not come at 5. The snow started at 5:12. He knew the time because there was a clock on the bank across the street, and he watched it the way you watch something when there is nothing else to do and the thing you are waiting for has not arrived and you are beginning to understand that it may not. Cars passed. Not many. The ones that did had their wipers going and their windows up and their headlights cutting through the snow in a way that made the snow look like it was moving sideways. He stood at the bus stop with his backpack and his hands in his jacket pockets. He was 7. He did not know what else to do besides wait. 2 hours and 6 minutes. That is how long he stood there. He was 7 years old, alone in the snow, and the cars kept passing, and the clocks kept moving, and nobody stopped. Until one did. A woman in a rust-colored sedan pulled over at 6:21. She leaned across the passenger seat and opened the door. She was wearing a dark blue coat. She did not ask his name. She did not ask where he lived. She did not ask why he was alone or where his parents were or what he was doing standing in the snow for 2 hours in the dark. She looked at him and she said 3 words. You look cold. He got in the car. She drove him home. She did not say much else. He did not say much either. She pulled up to the house. He got out. She drove away. He never learned her name. 3 words. You look cold. That was the whole thing. She did not make it complicated. She did not ask for context or identification or an explanation of why a 7-year-old was standing alone in the snow. She just saw him. And she stopped. And she opened the door. There are people who will read this story and say, she should have called social services. She should have asked more questions. She should have been more careful. And they are not entirely wrong, the world requires those things. But here is the thing that this woman understood that the careful people often miss. A 7-year-old standing alone in a snowstorm in 19 degrees does not need questions first. He needs a door opened first. Questions later. Warmth first. That understanding, that there is a correct order to kindness, was the gift she gave Cedric Holloway. And he carried it for the rest of his life. Lorraine was already at the front door when he turned around from the car. She had gotten home 11 minutes earlier. She had called the tutor. She had called the school. She had called the bus line. She was standing in the doorway with the phone still in her hand and the kind of terror on her face that does not look like panic. It looks like a woman who has already lost one person from this house and cannot survive losing another. She pulled him inside. She held him against her coat. She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said she was sorry. Then she said it again. He told her it was okay. It was not okay. But he said it because that was what you said when you were 7 and the person holding you was shaking. This moment, Cedric telling his mother it was okay when it was not, is one of the most important things in this entire story. Because that is exactly what small children do. They absorb the pain. They say it is fine. They say do not worry. They say it was nothing. Because they love the person holding them and they do not want the person holding them to feel worse. And the pain that gets swallowed at 7 does not disappear. It becomes something else. It becomes the reason you keep a jacket folded on the seat beside you. It becomes the reason you stop the bus. It becomes the reason, 38 years later, you are standing in the cold watching a pregnant woman reach for a door that just closed, and you cannot drive past. Not again. Not ever again. He never told anyone about the bus stop. When people asked, years later, why he always kept a jacket folded on the seat beside the driver's seat, he would say, I like to be prepared. That was all. He never told them about the 2 hours. He never told them about the woman in the blue coat. He never told them that the jacket was a size larger than he needed, specifically one size up, so that it could fit over whatever someone was already wearing. He had thought that detail through. He had thought it through when he was still 7 years old, standing in the snow, and a woman in a blue coat had given him the answer to a question he had not yet learned to ask. Now, 38 years later, it was time to answer it back. Imani Barnes was 26 years old and 8 months pregnant. She was a nursing student at Malcolm X College on the west side of Chicago. She took Route 63 to her prenatal appointments at the Woodlawn Community Clinic on the south side. The clinic was one of the only free prenatal care facilities on that side of the city. The bus ride was 47 minutes. She did not have a car. She had been on that bus route 22 times. This was the 23rd. Gerald Pitts had been driving Route 63 for 6 years. He was 44 years old. He was not a bad man in the dramatic sense of the word. He was the kind of man who had spent so long managing a schedule, next stop, next transfer, keep it moving, keep it on time, that people had become obstacles to the schedule rather than the reason for it. A pregnant woman who was moving slowly and holding the overhead bar and making the other passengers shift in their seats was, to Gerald, a disruption. He pulled over at 55th and Halsted. He told her that her presence was making passengers uncomfortable. He waited for her to step off. She stood on the curb. The door closed. The bus pulled away. 19 degrees. Snow on the ground. 8 months pregnant. No shelter at the bus stop, just a pole with a route sign on it. I want to name what Gerald Pitts did. Because it is easy in a story like this to let the villain be vague, to call it the system, or institutional failure, or unconscious bias. Those things are real and they matter. But Gerald Pitts made a specific choice. He did not look at Imani and see a pregnant woman in need. He looked at her and saw a problem to be managed. And that transformation, from person to problem, is one of the most dangerous things that can happen inside a human mind. It does not require malice. It just requires enough habit and enough indifference and enough days of managing a schedule until people stop being people and start being obstacles. Gerald was not a monster. He was worse than a monster. He was ordinary. And ordinary people making ordinary choices to look away are responsible for more suffering in this world than monsters ever will be. The bus behind Route 63 came up to the stop 2 minutes later. The driver saw her. He pulled over. He opened the doors. He got out of the driver's seat. He walked to the seat beside him. He picked up the jacket, navy blue, CTA regulation issue, one size larger than he needed, and he walked down the steps and he put it around her shoulders. His name was Cedric Darnell Holloway. He was 45 years old. And he had been waiting 38 years to give that jacket away. But giving away the jacket was going to cost him everything. Because what happened next, what Cedric did not know when he stepped off that bus, was that somebody was recording the whole thing. The woman in the third row of Cedric's bus had her phone out. Not to call for help. Not to call the police. Not to call CTA dispatch. She was recording. She recorded Cedric pulling over. She recorded him walking down the steps. She recorded him putting the jacket on Imani's shoulders. She recorded him helping Imani onto his bus. She recorded him speaking on the radio to dispatch. She posted it at 7:14 p.m. By midnight it had 40,000 views. By the following morning it had 2.3 million. The caption was simple: CTA driver gives his jacket to pregnant woman kicked off bus in Chicago snowstorm. Valentine's Day. February 14th. By noon the next day, Cedric's name was everywhere. By 3 in the afternoon, the CTA had suspended him without pay pending an investigation into an unauthorized stop and an unauthorized deviation from route. I want you to hold both of those things at the same time. 2.3 million people watched a man do a genuinely good thing and shared it because it moved them. And the institution that employed that man suspended him for doing it. Both of those things happened at once. The same act. Two completely different responses. The internet said, "This man is a hero." The institution said, "This man broke the rules." And here is the thing, the institution was not entirely wrong. He did break the rules. He abandoned his route. He stopped an unscheduled stop. He left his vehicle. By the standards of the manual, every single one of those things is a violation. But the question I want you to think about is this: when the rules of an institution produce a world where a bus driver gets suspended for giving his jacket to a pregnant woman in a snowstorm, what does that tell you about what the rules were actually built to protect? The investigation took 11 days. At the end of 11 days, the CTA terminated Cedric Holloway's employment. 6 years. Clean record. Not one disciplinary complaint in 6 years. Gone. He drove home from the depot on a Wednesday afternoon with his personal belongings in a cardboard box, a thermos, a photo of Lorraine, a small St. Christopher medal that had hung from the sun visor for 6 years, and he sat in his apartment in Woodlawn and looked at the empty seat beside where his jacket used to be. No jacket. No job. Just the same silence that a space makes when something that used to be in it is gone. He had been here before. He knew this silence. He picked up the phone. He called Lorraine. She answered on the second ring the way she had always answered, immediately, fully awake, as if she had been waiting. He told her what happened. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you regret it?" He thought about it. Actually thought about it, not the polished answer, the real one. "No," he said. "I regret that it cost what it cost. But not the stopping." Lorraine said, "Then you know what to do next." He said, "I don't know what to do next." She said, "You keep going. That is what we do. We keep going." Lorraine Holloway, age 62, former night shift worker at Tyson Foods, retired 3 years earlier with both hands permanently swollen, called her son after he had just lost his job for doing the right thing, and said 4 words: "We keep going." No drama. No protest. No lengthy speech about injustice. Just the same engine that had powered her through 19 years of the night shift and 2 children and an empty closet where a husband used to be. She knew something that takes most people decades to learn. That keeping going is not resignation. It is the most powerful thing a person can decide to do when the world has made going forward the harder choice. What came next, nobody expected. Not the CTA. Not the people who had shared the video. Not even Cedric himself. 3 weeks after the video went viral, Imani Barnes found Cedric. Not through the internet. Not through the news. Through the clinic. She had gone back for her next prenatal appointment and she had asked the intake nurse if she knew where the bus driver lived, the one from the video, and the nurse had looked at her for a long moment and said, "Why?" Imani said, "Because he is the reason I got to this appointment. And the appointment before this one. And I want to say that to his face." The nurse gave her an address. Imani knocked on the door of an apartment in Woodlawn on a Tuesday afternoon. Cedric opened it. He looked at her. She looked at him. She was still visibly pregnant, just weeks from her due date now. She was holding the jacket. She had washed it, pressed it, and folded it the exact way it had been folded on the bus seat. She held it out. He did not take it immediately. She said, "You lost your job." He said, "Yes." She said, "Because of me." He said, "Because of a decision I made." There is a difference. There it is again. That sentence. There is a difference. The most important sentence in this entire story. The man who had spent 38 years understanding the difference between things that look the same and are not. She said, "I want to tell you something." She paused. "Before you took your jacket off, I had been standing there for 4 minutes. 4 minutes in 19 degrees, 8 months pregnant. I counted every second. And in those 4 minutes, 11 cars passed me. 6 people on the bus behind yours looked out their windows directly at me. Not one person stopped." She swallowed. "You were the 12th thing that passed me. You were the only thing that stopped." 12. He thought about the cars passing in East St. Louis. The headlights sweeping across a 7-year-old boy standing in the snow and cutting on through without slowing down. He understood. He took the jacket from her. Then he said something she had not expected. He said, "What do you want to do? After the baby comes? What are you trying to build?" She told him. She was 3 semesters from her nursing degree. She wanted to work in labor and delivery. She wanted to be the first pair of hands. The first person in the room when someone arrived. He nodded. "And what is stopping you?" "The bus," she said. Simply. Honestly. "The appointments at the clinic are at 7 a.m. The first bus from my building doesn't run until 6:45 and it takes 55 minutes. By the time it gets there the intake window is closed. I have missed 4 appointments in the last 2 months. Not because I didn't try. Because the transfer at Halstead takes 12 minutes on a bad day and on a bad day there is no slack." Cedric was quiet. Then, "I know that intersection." She looked at him. "I know you do. I want you to stop here and really hear what Imani just described. She is 3 semesters from becoming a nurse. She has a clear goal and the ability to reach it. And the thing standing between her and that goal is not lack of motivation. It is not lack of intelligence. It is not laziness or irresponsibility or any of the things that people who have never had to depend on public transportation to get to a medical appointment might assume. It is a 12-minute transfer window that does not leave enough margin for anything to go wrong. It is a logistics problem. A solvable problem. A problem that someone with the right knowledge and the right connections and the right motivation might actually be able to fix. A man who had just lost his job had nothing but time. And he knew the routes. He knew every route. He was about to do something nobody had asked him to do. Something that was going to start with one car and one clinic and one route, and become something much larger than any of them imagined. His neighbor Otis had a 2006 Buick LeSabre that needed transmission work. Cedric knew a mechanic. They made a deal. Cedric fixed the Buick. Otis drove Imani to her appointments for the next 3 weeks until the baby came. That was how it started. Not with a grant. Not with a press conference. Not with a plan. With a Buick LeSabre and a favor and a man who understood that the gap between Imani and the clinic was not a failure of her character. It was a failure of infrastructure. And infrastructure could be fixed. He started calling it Route Home. He walked the neighborhoods around the Woodlawn Clinic for 2 weeks with a notepad. He knocked on doors. He talked to people. He asked the same question everywhere he went. Do you have a medical appointment you have been missing because you cannot get there? The answers broke something open in him. Mrs. Givens, 67 years old, diabetic, had been missing one dialysis appointment every 3 weeks for 8 months because the bus transfer from her building to the dialysis center required a 40-cent fare she often did not have on that specific day after paying her utilities. 40 cents. The difference between a woman getting dialysis and a woman not getting dialysis was 40 cents. Tanya Coleman's mother, 73, needed a prescription filled at a pharmacy on the other side of the neighborhood. The walk was too far for her knees. The bus ran only every 40 minutes at that hour. She had been going without the prescription 2 weeks out of every month because she could not time the trip around her daughter's work schedule. Harold, 58, a veteran, had been missing VA appointments because the nearest VA facility was not on a direct bus line from his building. It required 2 transfers and a 15-minute walk at the end. On days when his knees were bad, and his knees were bad most days, the 15-minute walk was simply not possible. I want to be precise about what Cedric was discovering. He was not discovering poor people who needed charity. He was discovering logistics problems that had never been treated as logistics problems. Mrs. Givens was not missing dialysis because she did not value her health. She was missing it because the fare system had no flex on a specific day. Tanya's mother was not neglecting her prescription because she did not care about her medication. She was navigating a transit schedule that was never designed for someone who moves slowly. Harold was not avoiding the VA because he did not want treatment. He was facing a last-mile problem, the final stretch between the bus stop and the facility, that nobody had ever thought to solve for someone with bad knees. These were engineering problems. And Cedric Holloway, who had spent 6 years driving the same routes and watching people navigate the exact gaps in the system, was the most qualified person in that entire neighborhood to engineer the solutions. He recruited drivers the way his mother had recruited help, not with money, because there was no money, but with clarity about what was needed and why. He found 12 people in Woodlawn who had a car, time they could give, and the specific willingness to show up for something that did not pay because the something mattered more than the pay. He named it Route Home. Because every route should take you somewhere you need to be. The first month, Route Home served 47 patients. Mrs. Givens to dialysis. Tanya Coleman's mother to the pharmacy. Harold to the VA. 47 people who got to the doctor. 47 people who did not have to choose between the bus fare and the copay. The missed appointment rate at the Woodlawn Clinic dropped 22% in 1 month. Not a miracle. A logistics problem that someone had finally treated as a logistics problem instead of a personal failure. 47 people. 1 man. A notepad. 12 volunteers. And a 2006 Buick LeSabre with a fixed transmission. But there was one person watching the news segment about Route Home who felt nothing. And that person matters more to this story than you might expect. Gerald Pitts was still driving Route 63. He had watched the story on the news. The segment about Route Home. The former CTA driver. The community health program. The missed appointments. The 47 patients. He had watched it on the television in the break room at the depot, between his first and second runs of the day. He did not call. He did not write. He did not feel the thing that some people feel when they see the aftermath of something they could have prevented. Gerald Pitts turned the page. I want to say that plainly and let it sit there. Because we have spent this whole story looking at the people who stop, the woman in the blue coat, Cedric, Otis with the Buick, the 12 volunteers, and Monty who found Cedric and gave him back the jacket and then helped him build something from the ground up. We have been celebrating the people who stop. Gerald is the other lesson. Not everyone who watches a door close and does nothing is a bad person. Some of them are Gerald Pitts, people who have been inside a system for so long that the system has become the only reality they can see. Gerald had been driving the same route for 6 years. He had been late. He had been blamed for delays. He had been written up for soft violations. The schedule had been the only constant thing in a job that was otherwise full of variables he could not control. When you spend 6 years being measured only by whether you are on time becomes the highest value you know. Gerald was not a monster. He was a man who had let a system replace his conscience so gradually that he did not notice it happening. The tragedy of Gerald Pitts is not that he was evil. It is that he was completely, quietly, entirely ordinary. He drove Route 63 for another 4 years after the night of February 14th. He passed the shelter at 55th and Halsted every day. The city installed a proper bus shelter there, glass panels, a bench, an overhead covering that blocked the rain and wind and snow, 6 months after a community petition with 400 signatures. Half of those signatures had been collected by patients at the Woodlawn Clinic who had stood at that pole in whatever the sky was doing. Gerald drove past it every day and never stopped. That is the whole thing he became. A man who drove past. Imani's daughter was born on March 3rd. Her name was Zora. She was born at the Woodlawn Community Clinic, attended by the same midwife who had been tracking Imani's pregnancy through all 23 bus rides on Route 63, all the missed appointments, all the narrow margins. Cedric was not in the delivery room. He was in the waiting area. He had driven Imani to the clinic at 5:30 in the morning when her contractions started. He had called Otis. Otis had come. When the nurse came out and said it is a girl, Cedric sat very still for a moment. Then he said, "Good." That was all. In the left pocket of the jacket Imani had returned to him, the one she had washed and pressed and folded exactly as it had been, she had tucked something before she gave it back. He found it when she was in the delivery room. He reached into the pocket and pulled out a small photograph. An ultrasound image. 8 weeks. A small white dot. A crease running through the center from where it had been folded and unfolded many times. He held it for a long time. The beginning of a person. 8 weeks old in a photograph. The crease in the middle from being carried close. He put it back in the pocket. On the morning route home officially launched, 12 volunteer drivers on the board, 8 runs scheduled for the first morning. Imani arrived at the dispatch room in the clinic with Zora in a carrier on her chest and the jacket folded over her arm. She had washed it again. Pressed it again. Folded it exactly the same way. She held it out to him. He looked at it. He looked at her. He looked at Zora, wide-eyed, serious, already appearing to be deciding something about the room she was in. He took the jacket. He held it for a moment. The weight of it. The specific weight of something that has been more places than you expected it to go and has come back changed in the way that things change when they have been needed. He did not put it on. He walked to the wall beside the whiteboard. There was a hook there, a simple hardware store hook, $2, the kind that holds whatever you need it to hold. He hung the jacket on the hook. It hung there beside the whiteboard and the phone and the schedule of the day's runs. The jacket was no longer his. It was no longer hers. It was the first piece of something that belonged to the room. I want to be precise about what happened in that moment. Cedric Holloway had carried that jacket for 6 years as a private thing, a reminder, a preparation, a one-size-larger promise to a version of himself that was 7 years old and standing in the snow. And then he hung it on a wall. He made it public. He made it the symbol of something larger than a personal memory. He turned a private wound into a public commitment. That is not a small thing. That is one of the hardest transformations a person can make, taking the thing that hurt you and turning it into the thing that helps someone else. Not hiding it. Not performing it. Just hanging it on the wall in a small room and saying, "This is what we are about here. This is the reason." Imani reached into the left pocket one last time before she let the jacket go. She took out the ultrasound photograph. The 8-week image. The white dot and the crease. She held it for a moment. Then she put it in the pocket of her scrubs. The jacket could belong to the program. The proof belonged to her. 2 years later, Route Home had 6 cars and 14 volunteer drivers and served 3 clinics on the south side of Chicago. Cedric was the coordinator. He still drove 3 days a week because he was the kind of person who did not stop doing the work just because he was also organizing it. His desk in the dispatch room had a phone and a computer, and the whiteboard had gotten too small and been replaced by a larger one that Otis had found at a school that was throwing it away. The jacket still hung on the hook by the door. Nobody moved it. Nobody asked about it. It was simply there. Imani was a full-time nurse at the Woodlawn Clinic. Labor and delivery referrals. Prenatal intake. She was the first pair of hands, just like she had planned. She was the person in the room when someone arrived. And she was the person who understood, in her bones, in her body, in the memory of standing on a curb in 19 degrees with her hand on her stomach, exactly what it meant when someone did not arrive. Because the bus had not come. Because the transfer had not connected. Because the fare had been 75 cents too much on a day when 75 cents was the entire distance between showing up and not showing up. She understood. Because she had been that person. Zora was 2 years old. She went to community daycare in the basement of a church on Cottage Grove while Imani worked. She was the kind of 2-year-old who looked at everything with a seriousness that made adults uncomfortable, because it felt like she was deciding something about them. She did not know yet about the bus. About the snow. About the jacket. She would. When she was old enough to understand that the world does not always stop for you, but that sometimes, if you are lucky, or if someone is paying attention, it does. There is something I want to say about Zora before we leave her. She was born because Cedric stopped. She was born in a clinic that Imani was able to keep attending because Otis drove and route home existed and a logistics problem got treated as a logistics problem. She is 2 years old and looking at everything with the seriousness of someone deciding something. She will grow up knowing the story. Not the way you know a story someone tells you, the way you know a story that is literally the reason you exist. The jacket on the wall is the reason there is a Zora. Some kindnesses ripple out so far that you cannot trace them all the way to the edge. Cedric's kindness, which began with a woman in a blue coat and 3 words, has a 2-year-old on the other end of it now who will one day understand what was decided about her before she was born. Lorraine came to Chicago in October. She took the Greyhound from East St. Louis because she did not like flying and because the bus was $32 and the plane was $180, and Lorraine had spent her whole life knowing the difference between those two numbers, even when she no longer had to. Cedric opened the door and she looked at him the way she had always looked at him. Reading his face. Every configuration of it. She saw something new. She did not say what it was. She just nodded the way she nodded when she saw something that was exactly what it should be. She met Zora. She held the baby the way she held everything, completely, without needing to say what it meant. On a Tuesday morning in October, Cedric drove a route home car past the bus stop at 55th and Halsted. There was a shelter there now. Glass panels. A bench. An overhead covering that blocked the rain and wind and snow. The CTA had installed it 6 months ago after 400 signatures. Cedric slowed the car. He looked at the shelter. He looked at the bench. He looked at the place where she had been standing. The shelter had not been there when it mattered. It was there now. That was the difference between fixing something and preventing it. He was learning the difference. He drove on. Cedric Holloway was not extraordinary. He did not change a system. He did not pass a law. He did not give a speech. He stopped a bus. He took off his jacket. He lost his job for it. He did not save the world. He changed one evening for one person on one cold night in February. That decision cost him everything he had built and became the foundation of everything he built after. And the woman in the blue coat who stopped her rust-colored sedan for a 7-year-old boy standing in the snow? She never knew. She drove away and she never learned what her 3 words planted. She will never know that a man folded a jacket on a bus seat for 38 years because of her. She will never know about Imani. About Zora. About route home. About the 47 people who got to the doctor in the first month. She just stopped. She said 3 words. She drove away. And the universe did something enormous with those 3 words for the next 38 years. This is the thing about small kindnesses that we almost never talk about honestly. The person who gives them almost never sees what they become. The woman in the blue coat did not get to see Cedric. Cedric did not know, when he folded that jacket on the seat, that Imani was going to be on his bus. Imani did not know, when she went back to find Cedric, that she was going to help build a community transport program that would serve hundreds of people. Every single one of them was working with incomplete information. Every single one of them made a decision based only on what was right in front of them. The 7-year-old in the snow. The pregnant woman on the curb. The jacket that was 1 size larger. None of them could see the chain they were creating. They just responded to what was directly in front of them with what they had. And that is the whole secret. That is the entire instruction. You do not need to see where it goes. You just need to stop. My people, Here's what I need you to do before you close this video. First, share this story. Not for this channel's numbers. Share it because somebody in your life right now is standing in the cold. They have not told you. They are holding it the way Cedric held the bus stop story for 38 years, the way Imani counted 4 minutes on a curb, the way Lorraine held swollen hands without complaint. They are holding it because they have learned, the way quiet people always learn, that the world does not always stop. Send this to them. Let it be your way of opening a door. Second, leave a comment. Tell me, have you ever been the person standing in the cold? Or have you ever been the person who stopped, or the person who drove past? I want to know which one you were. Not which one you wish you had been. Which one you actually were. This comment section is a safe place for honest answers. And third, and this is the one I want you to carry with you tonight. The question that will stay with you after the video ends and the screen goes dark and you are alone with it. There is always someone standing in the cold. There is always a door that has just closed. There is always a jacket. You do not have to fix everything. You just have to not walk past. The next time, and there will be a next time, what will you do? That question is the only thing I am leaving you with tonight.